So Tom, your career's been nothing short of amazing. Little boy from New Jersey comes to the Big Apple, makes it big. Did you always have it in mind? Today you're a restaurateur. Of course, you're Chef Tom Colicchio. You're an entrepreneur in many different ways. Obviously, with Crafted Hospitality, the group of restaurants you have, early days of being one of the co-founders of Gramercy Tavern, a TV personality, and now an investor too. And it seems to me like you're investing along the passion of your other pursuits, which is food insecurity, new ways of producing food, new ways of distributing and serving food.
Sure.
So food seems to be the centerpiece of everything you've done and do. I remember stories in our conversations of old where you talked about what it was like around the house as a kid growing up. Give us a little bit of color on that.
Yeah, I grew up in a blue-collar town, Elizabeth, New Jersey. My dad, when we were young, he was a barber. He had a barber shop, and I found out much later on in life he actually lost it because he had a gambling debt. And so he became a correction officer in a county jail. And my mother stayed home and watched us.
He was going to be on one side of those bars or the other, huh?
One or the other, yeah, exactly. And my mother, until I think we were about 13, my brothers and I have an older brother who's about a year older and one who's about 4 years younger. And I think when I was about 13, my mother went back to work, and she ended up working managing a school cafeteria. A high school cafeteria, which...
Did you go to that school?
I did. After they threw me out of Catholic school, yes, I did go to public school. But, food was always important. And I was, we had to be home for dinner every night. And my mother cooked most of the meals. Every now and then my father would get creative and try to do something.
Well, and what was the reaction among you and your brothers when he would try and cook something?
Listen, we were growing, teenagers, out playing sports and stuff. We were always hungry, so we were eating no matter what. When I was about 15, so we had to be at the table, and holidays always revolved around food. Summers too, so my other passion is fishing, and my grandfather started taking me fishing when I was about 5 or 6, and we used to catch, crabs, mostly crabs.
Fishing off a boat, off a dock?
Off a boat. We used to go to Barnegat Bay. He had a small boat, and then that he and his brother owned together, and it was like a 15-foot aluminum, boat with a small outboard engine.
Yeah.
And we stayed in the bay, and we used to mostly get crabs, clams, and sometimes fish. And we would come home, and I had 2 jobs when I was fishing. One was I had to clean all the fish and just get everything ready. So if it was fish, I would fillet it. Crabs, I would just clean up. Clams, I would soak and scrub and stuff. And then I'd give them to my mother and my grandmother, and they would cook. My other job was I had to keep my grandfather awake on the ride home.
Driving the boat or the car?
The car. The car. And I used to sit in the front seat. Now, this was the 70s, so I'm sure I wasn't wearing a seatbelt.
And it was a metal dashboard?
It was a metal dashboard. This was a Buick Electric 225.
I remember it well.
Car. So if you did get into an accident, you were probably safe. But I used to watch him, and I would, if I saw him dozing off, I would kind of, nudge him, and he would always say the same thing. I'm not sleeping, I'm just resting my eyes. And we always made it home. But these meals that we would do in the summer, because we catch like 2 bushels of crabs, and we would cook crabs a little differently. Being Italian American, we would steam them and then clean them up, take the shell off, take out the gills, and then put them in marinara sauce and make what we called crab gravy. And we'd serve that over linguine and then pick crabs. And clams we would just steam with garlic and parsley and white wine. If it was fish, it was usually fried. But because we had so much food, there was always additional family members and friends at the table, and there's like upwards to like 20 people. The
scent would go out, and
exactly,
they'd come.
Yeah, they would come.
Now, did you live in a multi-family house? Did you live in an apartment house? Single family?
It was a 4-family, and my grandparents lived. There were 2 4-families on a lot. My grandparents lived in one of the 4 families. We lived in the other. My aunt lived downstairs from us. And there was various family members around.
Was it only family in those 2?
No. Well, so it's interesting. It was owned by another family called the Spirito family. So they had a lot of family living there too.
Yeah.
And we were friends with them. They actually had a great restaurant in Elizabeth. Anyway, so I learned at an early age. And so, we had these dinners, and of course the conversation was always about fish that got away or the big crab that got away, and then it was usually about sports, and then politics, although we all were on the same page, so there wasn't much of an argument there. Family gossip was always a big thing. And when I guess I realized from a very young age is that food was the conduit that brought everybody around this table.
Yeah.
And it, somehow that stuck with me.
Everybody chip in on the cooking? You had your jobs, fillet the fish, clean up the crabs?
No, it all depended. My grandmother and my mother did it,
Yeah.
unless my grandmother, she was kind of up and down all at times, and now they would call her bipolar. Back then they called her manic depressive.
Yep.
And so there were times where she was really incapacitated, really couldn't do it. But we
Yeah.
didn't know. We just thought she was sick. And so, but there was, my mother and grandmother usually did it. My grandfather every now and then would pitch in. Food just became this very important thing. And at some point, I decided that I wanted to cook. And it started out by making pancakes. Like I read the box and like I could do this. Right? And so I just, there was something about it that I enjoyed. I had a hard time reading through recipes and trying to understand what they were getting at.
Yeah.
And it was kind of frustrating. And then when I was about 15 or so, my dad came home with a couple books, and there was one book, and I'm not quite sure what this book was doing in the county jail library, but it was Jacques Pepin's La Technique.
Mm-hmm.
And this book stressed the idea of that techniques and methods were more important than recipes. And once I understood that, I didn't need the recipe anymore.
Was it unlocked for you, huh?
Yeah, it's just completely unlocked, and it just made it so easy. And so around the same time, at 15 years old, I think my dad suggested I become a chef. And my dad wasn't the kind of guy to have long conversations about the future with his children, but he somehow instilled in all of his children to pursue something that you love. And my brother went into business; he just loved numbers his whole life. My younger brother was a very successful high school basketball coach in New Jersey, and my dad just I guess somehow imparted to us to follow your dreams.
Yeah.
So in my yearbook picture, that I still have my yearbook, on the bottom it says plans to be a chef. So
No
it's the only
kidding.
thing I ever wanted to do.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Now, the fellow who's the owner of La Bernardine,
Eric Repair, yeah.
Eric, yeah. I heard him one time say that he giggles at the fact that he is a celebrity as a chef.
Yeah.
He said because growing up, he said he became a chef because he didn't know how to do anything else.
Right.
It wasn't a very celebrated craft back
No.
then. And in your lifetime, you've seen that go from, those are people in the back of the house who you really never saw, to now being the personalities and their personalities reflecting not only the meal, but the whole ambiance and the feel of the restaurant, what the message, what
Sure.
the theme of the restaurant is. Is that still evolving? Is it changing more? Is it less emphasis on personalities or more emphasis on genres of food?
No, well, I think all the above, but you have to go back to Nouvelle Cuisine. You remember back in like the 70s, that became a buzzword out of Europe.
Yep.
Nouvelle Cuisine. And what people kind of remember from Nouvelle Cuisine was this idea that different ingredients were introduced, the food became lighter, the sauces became lighter. But the one thing that did happen during that time is prior to Nouvelle Cuisine, all the food was served in the dining room. It came out on platters, and it was
Yes.
French served.
Yes.
And it was done beautifully, but you didn't see the chef's personality on a plate. Now with Nouvelle Cuisine, all of a sudden chefs started plating their food. So you saw their personality, you saw their individual style, and they started breaking the norms.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I think people wanted to know who these chefs were. Who's the Paul Bocuse? Who's the Trois Gros brothers? Who's Georges Blanc? And these famous chefs became famous because people wanted to understand who they were.
It's so interesting that now their personalities were on the plate.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the food that was family style served. It
Right.
was how it's presented, how it's plated is
Yeah.
become so important and a reflection on that
Right,
personality.
and regional French food started becoming more important too. These chefs were in various regions, and they were celebrating their food, but then reinventing it. And so again, when you see that kind of process, and there's a different thought that goes into it, people want to know what's behind that. And then that transferred over to America, and with the advent of new American cuisine.
And was it broader here because there's such a cross-section of all different kinds of styles and ethnicities?
No, it wasn't at first.
Because in France, it's French food.
Right, but it's still regional. But it wasn't at first. First it was new American cuisine. So you heard about Alice Waters and maybe Jonathan Waxman,
James Beard.
James Beard. Well, James Beard wasn't technically a chef in my book because he didn't run a restaurant. That's when chef means boss. It doesn't mean if Bruce Springsteen were French, they'd probably call him the chef, not the boss, right? But people want to know about these personalities, and that kind of stayed like that for a while. And new people would come in, the Jimmy Sneeds of the world and the Bradley Oggins. These are all the chefs that were just slightly older than I was when I was coming up. And then you had you know, the magazines started writing about them, Gourmet and Food and Wine and Cuisine magazine, which I actually do remember. And so the personalities became more important. And that kind of stayed the same. And then with the advent of food TV, it just kind of blew up.
So you mentioned the magazines. Did the magazines reflect what was happening, or did they lead what was happening?
It's a good question. You know, I think that it just became part of what the magazine had to write about. They were reporting. They weren't making it. They were reporting. So I think the chefs were the dog, and I think the magazines were the tail. And because I think the magazines had to fill their pages, and all of a sudden they started writing about chefs.
Yeah.
And so, and then I have my own theory about what happened in the 80s. So after, you know, I think I'll focus on New York. After everybody stopped going to Studio 54 and putting illicit drugs up their nose, they had to figure out something to do. They couldn't do that anymore. So they started going to restaurants in a big way. And, you know, I worked at Quilted Giraffe. Quilted Giraffe back in the 80s was $150 a person.
Yeah.
It was packed every night. They only opened 5 days a week. They were closed Saturday and Sunday. You couldn't get in for love and money. Politicians.
Was there a chef's name highlighted?
Barry Wine was the chef owner.
Yeah.
And Barry was an attorney. And then he moved up to New Paltz. He had a house in New Paltz. He decided to quit law. He moved up there and started the Quilted Giraffe up in New Paltz, and then came to New York and did it. And wildly successful. And so my feeling is, so all of a sudden, you know, people, they started going to restaurants, and restaurants became really popular. And that's when you couldn't get into restaurants. And that just, you know, it really, I think, started, you know, putting food and chefs as part of pop culture versus just in the kitchen. And that's when everything really blew open.
When did the name, you've not named any of your restaurants,
No.
your name. When did chefs' names first become the name of the restaurant?
Well, you know, they did it in France. I mean, I think of restaurants like Maison Pic, when the chef was chef's name, and I'm thinking, well, Trois Gros was named after them. A little later on, Michel Bras started
So
his restaurant.
the first ones here were all French, I guess, huh?
First ones here were French, although I'm trying to think, of course, the first major restaurant after the World's Fair was La Pavillon, because the French came over and did La Pavillon in the French in the World's Fair,
yeah.
and then that restaurant stayed here.
And they brought us the Belgian waffle.
Right, and that was, right, and that was Henri Soulet, and then trained so many of the chefs. So if you can take a direct line from Henri Soulet straight down to, you know, John George's son now is running 3 restaurants. Yeah.
I had a conversation a week or two ago with a couple of guys who are in banking. They do a lot of entertaining. And we got into a conversation about the pricing of food now. And it seems to me that as I look at all the successful restaurants around, the conversation we had with those 2 extraordinary bankers was that the restaurant experience it looks like right now it's separated from cost to evaluating is an overall experience. So one of the 2 were complaining about the cost of lamb chops at such and such a place is now crazy. And we got around to you can't look at it as a cost of lamb chops. You have to look at it as a cost of an experience.
Yes.
And you've been there for a long time in terms of viewing it not just as those whipped potatoes that you're so famous for here at Kraft. You provide a whole experience here.
Right.
People who come in, it's how they're greeted at the door, and you've been emphasizing the total experience forever.
Sure. You know, it's interesting. So the first owner of Le Bernardin, Gilbert Lacose, who passed away, he would talk about that. He would say, well, they're saying my restaurant's expensive. And so if it's $200 per person, you're here for 2.5 hours. If you look at it that way, it's not that expensive for an experience.
Yes.
But you're right, that's what we're doing. We're providing an experience. It's not just food. But also, these bankers, I'm sure every single day they're dealing with inflation. It's a real thing.
Yes.
And we have, you know, for restaurants, there's 2 parts of inflation. One is the products that we're buying are much more expensive, and our labor is much more expensive. Labor went up, which is, I'm happy it did. It sort of gets me.
But you always have to balance off at, okay,
Of course.
everyone understands, but now I got sticker shock.
Right.
And I have to couch it in an overall experience and not just have someone sitting there. I know it used to drive me crazy when I'd sell a fruit and gourmet basket and someone would call up and say, I could have gone to the grocery store and bought these 22 pieces of fruit for a lot less.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I can buy those lamb chops for a lot
Right.
less than it cost me in your restaurant.
You know, what gets me is, we're in New York City, and very liberal city, right? And I'm a liberal Democrat, but they're all saying, we want to see labor go up. Labor, we want to see the workers make money. Okay, good. Someone has to pay for that. The margins in our business are so small.
Yeah.
And I can't absorb that. And so we have to raise prices. And I'm okay with that. I want to see the workers make more money. In fact, I'm really glad that after the pandemic that we were able to do that. We were able to raise our pay rates and raise our prices. Now we have to see if that sticks.
Yes.
I suspect that the pay scale is not going to come down that much, and inflation will come down, and eventually you'll have.
You mean commodity inflation?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the gains then, well, even service, I think, but I think the gains, I think just in general wages, aren't going to come down that much, but commodity inflation will come down, and so the gains made by the workers will stick.
Yes.
Because right now, they may be a little underwater. I mean, maybe payrolls, gains are up by 5%, but inflation's up 7%, so they're down 2%. Eventually, it's going to get down. I think it's already down to like 4 and change. So it's equalizing out. But I don't see those rates coming down anytime soon.
You mean the compensation?
Yeah, I'm talking about hourly rates too.
Yeah.
Right.
And you've talked a lot. Your pal Danny Meyer has been in the forefront of experimenting with other forms of compensation beyond the tipping mechanism.
Listen, I would love to get rid of tipping, but I think that the only way to do it, if I were to do it here, and I've had this.
And Danny suspended that program.
He did, and he was doing it a little different than I would do it.
Yeah.
And I've gone down this rabbit hole on social media, and some people get it and some people just don't. So if I did away with tips, I would still have to make my staff whole.
Yes.
All right.
And you've talked about experimenting with that over a couple of few periods.
I tried doing it for lunch when we did lunch at Kraft, and it didn't work out because lunch didn't work out at Kraft. But so the idea was that if I let's say the average tip is 20%.
Yep.
Okay. So now I would have to fill in that 20% gap. Okay. I'd have to raise prices probably by about 25% because now it's taxable income.
Yes.
And I'm okay doing that because dollar for dollar, the customer is still going to pay the same. So instead of tipping 20%, they're going to pay 20. There may be a difference of 5%, but they're going to pay more.
But perception is different then.
Perception is a little different then.
Yeah.
The argument is that, well, I want to tip someone and make sure I get better service. If you get bad service and you decide to put a low tip on the bill, do you think that waiter is going to come and tell me, I got a low tip? Because I'm going to say, well, did you provide bad service? No. And we're a pooled house. So that tip, it gets pulled by everybody. Nobody feels it.
So you pull all the tips.
Pull the tips. So nobody feels that, okay? But if it's a true meritocracy now, and someone complains, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And on top of that, the only person who's going to get hurt is the person I have to have a conversation with because they provided bad service. You're not going to penalize the rest of the team. And then it becomes a meritocracy as opposed to what it is now. But the only way to do this is if there is legislation that makes it impossible to tip. And the reason being, if I go out there and do this myself, my prices are 25% higher, and when you compare that to another restaurant, it puts me at a competitive disadvantage.
And it's just so ingrained in the culture.
It is.
You're
It is.
pedaling upstream there,
It is, but then you factor in certain people that will get tipped more. African Americans get tipped less money. Women who aren't attractive get tipped less money than women who's attractive. This just happens. Yeah, I mean minorities get tipped less for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so you get rid of those inequities. I think it'll make it fair. But people I talk to, they just like having that control. They think they have control. They really don't, but they think they do. Yeah.
You emphasize something I've tried to emphasize with my kids all their lives. My kids are now starts with a 4, and I have always emphasized with them. I always wanted them to work at least at one point in a service industry so they'd understand what it is to work for tips.
Sure.
And they each did, and I think it helped them to round out who they are. They're pretty wonderful people. But I always said to them, it doesn't cost more to have a personality. And when you have someone, wait staff who has a great personality, it just makes a difference. How do you work with your team? Because I like to dine here at Kraft. I think it's the best restaurant experience in New York that I've experienced. And a big part of food is always terrific. The place looks great. But I think what sets Kraft apart from other restaurants is the universal level of service and engagement on your floor staff.
Right. Let's split two things here, service and hospitality. Because service is the mechanics of getting the food to the table, taking the order, pouring wine, things like that.
Yep.
Hospitality is how you feel
Yep.
when someone's taking care of you. You feel hospitality. Service, you don't want to feel service. You don't want to see service.
You just want to know
so
what's there.
happens,
Yeah.
right? And so part of creating that is creating a culture in the restaurant, a culture of hospitality. And we're lucky that we have a few individuals who just exude hospitality. People like Cesar,
Yes.
and Ed, and they're just masters at it.
But Cesar, when he came here, over 20 years
He
ago
had it.
now?
He had it already.
He had it then?
He had it. He was just, Danny likes to refer to it as 51%. Like 51% of if someone has a desire to make people happy, the other 49% you could train.
Yep.
Cesar came here being Cesar. He didn't speak English as well as he does now. He's a citizen now, which is amazing. He just exudes it. It's him. It's who he is.
He immigrated here from Colombia.
From Colombia, yeah. And so you get lucky when you have a few people like that, and that becomes contagious.
Sets the tone.
Everyone sees that, yeah, and that becomes the culture. And then the stories around his hospitality become part of the culture. The stories of him not even knowing what Dr. Pepper was, and someone asked him for Dr. Pepper, and he figured it out, ran over to the store with his own money, bought a couple cans of Dr. Pepper, poured it for the person. They knew exactly what they had.
Yeah.
That's hospitality, caring enough that this will make this person's evening. That is something that it's hard. You don't teach that. That's something that's just his mother taught him that.
Yeah.
And that's something that.
So you're bringing Cesar's mother in to train the rest of the staff?
Exactly. We're sending everybody to Colombia. During the pandemic, we lost a lot of people who had been here a long time, and we hired a lot of young, people who had less experience, and they come along for it. They're there for it, but it all happens. Number one, by giving them the tools to do their job. I mean, we let them know that if you want to comp something, you want to buy someone, you hear someone and they can't, it's a party of four maybe, and someone's trying to make a decision between one pasta or the other, bring both out.
Yeah.
And just let us know.
Yeah.
Make that, and you make that decision. We don't have to make that decision. You make that decision, but just come to us and say, hey, you got to comp this off the bill.
And then people at the table, for that little gesture, it's magic.
Right. What I'm trying to get them to do now is, if someone has a request, what I don't want them to do is walk from the table and go, I got to check with the chef. Because then for that 10 minutes while they're checking with the chef, you're sitting there going, what am I going to say when they say no?
Yes.
Not if they say no, when they say no. You're convinced they're going to say no. And so I'm trying to get the staff to say, yes, we'll deal with it. That's me training my chefs to deal with that too, because sometimes the roadblock downstairs in the kitchen.
We like your restaurant out in Garden City at Roosevelt Field called Small Batch. We did a show there recently. It's a very different concept, but still the people in the kitchen there, and I've been in the kitchen. It's an open kitchen.
It's wide open.
There's a spirit of discovery and curiosity there. That is evident in you. And how do you keep that up now as you look for different vendors? I know. We're doing some things at Harry and David where we're looking for unique individual vendors for that portion of our community who are on that treasure hunt.
Right.
They want to find something very special. How do your chefs have access to people who have something unique and different? Are there certain times they can come and visit with your people? Do you have vendor days?
No, we don't have vendor days, but it happens all the time. We're always getting specialists. We're always, the chef there, Tommy Chang, has been with me I think around 12 years now. Kurt's been around for like 16, and so
and Kurt, who's the manager
he's the general
there,
manager,
has been with you, been here at Kraft.
Right.
I think he was he at Beekman too?
He started here as a server, and then moved up to management. I think
Yeah.
he went down to Beekman, and then we moved him out there.
Yep.
So he's been around, so he understands the culture. No, when it comes to looking and sourcing out new ingredients, that's just a matter of reaching out to your suppliers and asking them, what do you have? What's
Yeah.
new? A lot of times we'll get emails from them saying these are the specials for the day, this is what we have coming in, and you want to empower the chefs to do that. And part of that is also letting them know you have free reign to create dishes. You don't have to wait for me.
Yes.
If you wait for me now, you've been waiting a long time.
Yeah.
But they understand, they're put in a bit of a box and saying, okay, you can create within this box.
We got this menu. What portion of the menu do you give them flexibility to
As much
change
as they
all
want.
the time?
But it's a style. Say there's a style of cooking here,
Yeah.
and stay within that style. I don't want to come in. And,
Is it different at Temple?
Yes, there's. Again, it's not something that we define. It's not written out saying these are the rules. But they know because again, the chefs all come up through the organization. So, and also keep in mind going back to originally we started talking about when technique and method. They know how certain techniques that I use, and they'll always adhere to those. So I'm not worried that all of a sudden, if I want to roast a vegetable, I'm not going to get someone just putting a bunch of vegetables on a sheet pan and throwing it in the oven. That's great for home.
Yep.
That doesn't cut it in a restaurant. And so they know the technique involved. So anything they do, it really doesn't matter what the products are. They know how they know how I want them to treat that product, and they'll do that. I want them to be creative. There are no. Listen, if they're looking at their menu, and they see something's not selling, they have free rein to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because it's just taking up space. Get rid of it. Find something that people like.
Do you like to narrow the scope of your menus? Do you ever come in and say, I think we've gotten too broad here?
It depends. Yeah, there are times, but for me, it's not looking at the menu and saying it needs to be a certain size. If things are selling, that's a good indication that you have a pretty round out menu, and people are enjoying a lot of different things. If you have a few dogs on the menu, you have to quickly get rid of them. But there are dishes that chefs like that we don't want to get rid of because we like the dish, even though it may not sell. I mean, I remember Witchcraft. I had a fast casual restaurant, although it's finally over, and we had this egg dish with white anchovies and like salsa verde that I loved, and so I wouldn't take it off the menu, but they would sell like 2 a day.
I'm hearing it, I'm saying, I'm not ordering it, but if you say it's really good, I'm going to try it.
It was absolutely delicious, but we didn't sell it, and so we had to give it up.
How did this TV stardom begin?
Prior to Top Chef, I had done, Today Show and things like that. In fact, the first time I was ever on TV, I swore to God I would never do TV again. So this was the experience.
Was it a disaster? Or?
No, it wasn't, but this was the experience. I win Best New Chef in 1991, Food and Wine magazine. I get a call from Regis and Kathy Lee, producer, and Regis and Kathy Lee, saying, we want you to come on. It's on a Monday. Now, they called me on a Friday. They said, can you get together a dish and run through it? Sure. So I pack up a little cooler. It was a braised red snapper, served with eggplant caviar. In the restaurant, I would fry slices of eggplant and sandwich the eggplant caviar between it, and then it was cooked in a lemon rosemary vinaigrette with roasted peppers and lots of parsley.
All right, stop. My mouth is watering already. Yeah.
I cut it down a little bit, but I had the eggplant, I had the fish, I had the vinaigrette. That was the dish. Well, I run through the dish, and she was like, great. Now this is like around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So these 2 stagehands, the producer disappears. I'm leaving. I said, what time should I come here on Monday? I said, I'll get here at 8 o'clock. So I walked in at 8 o'clock. I walked in at 8 o'clock. This producer was like, where have you been? I was like, and they're laughing. These guys are laughing now. And I was told to come at 8 o'clock. You had to be here at 6:30. You missed rehearsal. You're going to blow this. And so I'm setting up, back then, nowadays when you go into TV, someone sets everything up for you, everything's there. I had setting everything up. There's a makeshift table.
And you're nervous now?
I'm nervous. And every 5 minutes, she goes, you're going to screw this up.
Thank you.
So I'm out of my mind. So the segment starts. Regis comes over. I start taking the eggplant, cut it in half, just score it, olive oil, salt, pepper, goes in the oven. Now I had another one cooked already under the table.
Sure.
But I put it in the oven, and Regis turns around, and he's fumbling with the dials trying to turn the oven on. And I was like, no, come over here. And he's messing around. And I said, no, we have one over here. He walks over, he goes, this is what happens when you miss rehearsal. I was like, I can't believe this guy just threw me under the bus. I was like, I can't believe it. So we get through. I remember, I think I have a VHS of it still. And I remember pointing, they had my fingers pointing. I'm shaking. But we get through it, and we get through in time, and it was great. She comes over.
She being the producer?
The producer, and she goes, wow, that was great. I said, why did he say that? She goes, oh no, he missed rehearsal. That's great. So she said, that was great. Come back. And I looked at her and I said, I will never do TV again.
And now, how many years? 17 years?
It was yeah, something like that. Yeah, 17. But so let me finish the story though. So years later, I'm in Connecticut doing the Christmas special at for Martha Stewart. And we had some downtime, and someone asked that same question, when did you do TV? And I told them the story. I have a hard time remembering names.
Don't tell me the same producer.
I remember, and I said, and they said, who was her name? I said her name, and they went, I could see everybody's face. It's like, she's a producer for us. Do you want to say hi? I was like, no, I don't.
I still have nightmares.
Yeah. You know, I got a call one day from a producer saying, we're doing this show called Top Chef, and we think you'd be great as the judge. And my response was, nope, not interested. It was like reality TV. There was some other reality TV done around restaurants, and it didn't really go well for the chef. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And they called back again. They said, listen, we think you'd be really great. Can we just send someone to get you on camera? Fine. So someone shows up with a little camcorder and just interviewed me. 2 days later, they called. They said, can you come out to LA for a screen test? I said, no, I'm not coming to LA for a screen test. I don't want to do this. I said, but there was a documentary made of the opening of Kraft. And it was done by ABC News. It was supposed to go on Nightline. And 9/11 hit, and they scrapped it.
Yep.
And about a year later, it showed up on PBS. So I sent them the DVD of that, and they called and they said, we want to make an offer.
And was opening a Kraft, was that your big step? This is you coming onto Broadway?
No, Gramercy was.
Gramercy, yeah?
Yeah, because Gramercy, I was an owner of the restaurant.
Yep.
I was a chef there.
You were there to the
was
mid-2000s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, my partner and I owned a big chunk of that restaurant. It
Yep.
wasn't, you know, Danny just gave me a few points. I mean, I put money in.
Yep.
And so no, that was it. Gramercy was the big deal.
It was #1 restaurant for the longest time.
Long time. And Kraft was open for 2 years before I left Gramercy. I didn't leave Gramercy to open Kraft.
You're belt and suspenders.
Right. I did both, and then eventually, in fact, I was going to buy the restaurant from Danny.
Oh yeah.
And over a weekend, we had the deal all done, and over the weekend, I thought about it and said, well, this is what I want, and I made a decision to sell it.
And would you have an interest now in opening more restaurants, or?
Well,
I know you're investing in things on the ag side of things.
Yeah, we are. In fact, we're in the process of opening a restaurant in D.C.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, although the whole project got put on hold because now the building's for sale, but long story. But no, we'll still open restaurants. I still
You still got the bug.
you know, I'm still running a business, and
Yes.
opening restaurants is just, you know, continuing to expand the business, and not just for me, but there's a lot of, you know, great people in the organization that want to do more.
Yes.
And so I have to be there for them. I can't be selfish about it and say, well, you know, I
got
want to slow
enough.
down. I got enough. No, if they pick, and they also know that you're going to have to pick up more slack here.
Yeah.
There's only so much I'm going to do.
You have experimented with less service and more casual, like you did. You mentioned which.
Well, Witchcraft, you know, we did fast casual before fast casual was a word, and I think we were way out in front of it. And the other problem with Witchcraft is we treated it, especially in the early days, we treated it like a restaurant as opposed to fast casual, which
Yes.
is, they're very different businesses. Yes, they serve food, but it's a very different business. And the first one that we opened was right next door. And so we had a big halo effect, and we
Yes.
did all the food here. And it was fantastic. We should have just stopped right there. Or at the time, had I known better and treated it like a fast casual business, I would have franchised it.
Yes.
We had a lot of opportunity to do that, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to grow it organically, and it's hard to do.
6 years ago, we started working with you from Smile Farms hat
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
and you've been very generous and very helpful to us. And what we do at Smile Farms is we try and create work opportunities for people, adults with developmental disabilities primarily, but not just. And tell us what the experience is like now that you have 4 of our folks working here at Kraft.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 here at Kraft now. We have some at Temple
Yes,
Court now as well. Well, it's, you know, as you know, it started out, we had a farm, an urban farm attached to one of my restaurants.
Yes.
And so you started out by farming. When I got to know a little bit about why you're doing what you're doing, it really appealed to me. First off, I have a nephew on the spectrum who's very high functioning, so I understood some of the issues.
Yeah,
But also,
80% of the adults with disabilities who are qualified to work
Right.
are unemployed.
Unemployed, right. And that leads to so many things. There's dignity about working, and that's what we see, you know. And
And you see that in your places.
that's what we're talking. Yeah. And they're great, you know, young men and women now that we have here that just do such a fantastic job, and they become so part of the fabric of the family. Like, people watch out for them. We take care of them. We make sure that they're you know, they have what they need, but we also make sure they work.
Yeah.
Because I think that if they have to stand around, there's nothing for them to do. They feel like, you know, they're not providing.
Not genuinely
you know.
part of the team.
Yeah, and so
I won't use his name, but when one fella steps up, I heard the story that in your preset You have a team meeting before dinner service begins, and he spoke up for the first time and said what it meant to him to be part of the team. You know?
Yeah.
That has an impact on everybody, right?
But that's also what they go to a family meal or a lineup meeting, and we're talking about the day, who's coming in, issues from the night before, things we're working on, new dishes. Every night we taste wine, and so I think they're seeing this interaction between the team here, and they feel part of it. And I think eventually they get the nerve to speak up. If you talk to my brothers, they would say I'm the least likely person to do TV.
Because you were shy.
I was shy.
Yes.
Like, the idea of getting up in front of the class and having to present something freaked me out.
Yeah.
It was working in restaurants that got me over it, because when I was the chef in the restaurant, I had to get up every day and talk about
what you were doing.
What we're doing, and get over it. And so you see them also, when they come, they start to open up, they start to blossom, they start to realize that they have worth, there's value in what they're doing, they're part of a team.
It's not just a paycheck.
No, it's not at all. No, it never has been.
Yeah.
It's about the dignity of work. It's about being part of something. It's about feeling that you're doing work that's meaningful. And it's great to have them here. I mean, we wouldn't trade it for anything right now. It's part of our company. It's part of who we are.
You get it. And I think we need to tap into your knowledge about where food production is going. And I say production reluctantly, because you grow it, you raise it. There's all different things. It's not production. But you're involved in some vertical farming operations. You see anything there that you think really has promise, or we're in the very early stages of something you think will be big?
Sure. Well, I'm an investor in Bowery Farms, and I do, and I'll tell you why. Climate change is a thing. It's not something made up.
I'm a farmer. I've learned. My goodness.
It's real. And you hear stories, a couple years ago in Spain, it wiped out the entire lettuce production because of floods.
Yes.
You see that in the Central Valley, after this winter. Strawberries underwater.
I can tell you about the stress on pears in Southwest Oregon.
Sure.
Thank goodness this year we had a tremendous snowfall, so the snowpack is melting. Looks like we're going to have great water this year. Yeah. But I'll give you a number there. We normally harvest about 16,000 tons of pears, and we use a small percentage of those in our gift pack. The rest we sell off to one grocery chain. Last couple of years, we've only harvested 5,000 or 6,000 tons. Yeah. Looks like we'll be back to 16, 17 this year, which is thank God. But that was 4 or 5 years of drought there that was very tough on us.
So Bowery, I think they use about 95% of the water that they use is recycled. And they're not going to be affected by climate change. They're inside a huge warehouse.
Yes.
And so it's a real hedge against climate change. And I think we're going to need all, listen, in the perfect world, you grow everything outside under the sun and it's great, but we don't live in a perfect world. And so I think it's necessary. Plus, to feed the 50 billion people that we're going to have on this planet in 10 or so years, we're going to need a lot of tools in the tool shed to make sure people are fed. The other, I invested in a few alternative protein companies, and same thing there. I mean, there's going to be a shortage of protein.
You need a lot of shots on goal here.
You need a lot. Yeah, you do. Exactly. Yeah.
Next week I'm in Ohio at the Jones family farm.
Oh, you're going up there? Oh, good.
I was in Ohio yesterday and go back next week. We're going to have dinner on the farm.
Tell Farmer Lee I said hi. I just saw him last week. He was at a party that I was at.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I think they grow the finest vegetables I've come across, and it's asparagus season right now.
It is.
So we'll be harvesting asparagus, and he grows green, purple, white, and yellow.
Yeah.
And so we'll be harvesting and enjoying them right there on the farm.
Good. Yeah.
Wonderful family. 6 generations working that farm.
Yeah. He and I have this. I love what he does, but because I like to buy local, I don't buy from Ohio, and we always have this. But every now and then I do. Yep. So I jumpstart the season because the growing season starts a little sooner there than here.
Yep.
So we'll start buying stuff. Plus, he has some specialty stuff. These tiny little
microgreens.
Not the microgreens, flowers. These little tiny herb flowers, and there's a whole bunch of different flowers now that are used, culinary flowers that you see more and more of, and some of it's quite good.
He's been working too with the University of Ohio State University on the food science people with food is medicine.
Yes.
And he was explaining how a rhubarb, before it begins to grow the fruit, is super dense in nutrients, and broccoli. But he also told me that broccoli that we get now in a grocery store is 3 times less nutrient dense than it was when I was a kid.
Sure.
How do you make up for that?
By trying to introduce the older varieties that are nutrient dense.
Yes.
But you hit on something, food is medicine. There's an organization I'm involved with, Wholesome Wave, and they've been actually creating a prescription plan. And so some hospitals, when you go in to get treatment, like at Bellevue, they actually have a plan. When you go in for treatment, you're prescribed fruits and vegetables. And through the SNAP program, you get additional money if you're buying fruits and vegetables. It's called a double bucks program. So if you're, back up a little bit. Right now, we have a problem in that food is cheap. So calories are cheap in this country, but nutrition's expensive. Right?
Sure.
Buying healthy food,
Yep.
you shop for your family, you're buying healthy food, it's expensive. You buy processed stuff, it's less expensive. And so how do you deal with that? So there's farmers markets where if you are using SNAP or food stamps and you're buying fruits and vegetables, if you spend $20 on fruits and vegetables, you take that receipt, you go to a kiosk, and they'll give you another coupon for $20.
To try and change your
So
behavior.
this is an incentive for people who are low income to buy healthier food. All right. Plus, that money now that would normally go to a supermarket goes directly to a farmer. There's a multiplier effect, like $1.75 for every dollar that a farmer takes in because they're buying materials, they're buying equipment, they're hiring people, and so it makes perfect sense. We need people to eat healthier food, but if it's expensive, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to demonize someone for making bad choices, as if they actually have a choice.
Yep.
Right. And so, but the prescription is same thing with that. The doctors are saying you need to get more fruits and vegetables into your diet, and we're going to make it easier for you to do that. We're going to give you money. I'm forgetting which program, but actually they used it to fund that. But it's starting to take hold. It's starting to make sense. And then, I'd like to see the insurance companies get more involved because they're going to benefit from a healthier country.
Yes.
Right?
When we were out at Small Batch and we interviewed Dr. Patrick O'Shaughnessy, who's the CEO of the Catholic Health System on Long Island.
Right. We just did a restaurant there.
I see it. And tell us about that program because...
Well, why don't you finish what you were saying?
Well, he's turned me on to this sad fact that in his 6 emergency rooms on his 6 hospitals on Long Island, that about 40% of people who present in those emergency rooms are hungry.
Yeah.
And so he's quietly started a program, which you're now supporting, where they're creating to-go bags.
Yeah.
So if a social worker or a nurse or a doctor is interacting with a patient, they sense that food is an issue, and in conversation they find out it is, and they send them home with a pack of food that has real good foodstuffs in it. We're supplying some of that from Smile Farms, and you've gotten involved in that program. So tell us about the program you're working with Dr. Patrick on.
So we have a restaurant that we opened there called Root and Sprig. Actually, the operators, the Witchcraft team started something new called Root and Sprig, and we partnered with an old assistant of mine. But what they do is they go into hospitals and they take a master lease for the ground floor of retail, and they're putting better food in, more nutritious food in, services that can help people. And so I think we have 6 restaurants now, and so we're actually working with the hospital
on the menus, sourcing the product.
Right, but to go back to hunger for a second. That's not surprising to me at all because there is hunger in every county in this country. Every county, and so I don't care where you live. If you're in Greenwich, Connecticut, there's hunger in that county. If you're in Short Hills, New Jersey, there's hunger in that county. And so, my wife made a film a couple years back called A Place at the Table. It's about hunger in America.
Yes.
And it's what's frustrating to all the anti-hunger advocates is that we can fix this. Because in this country, people aren't hungry because of famine or war or drought. They're hungry because they don't have money and we don't have the political will to make sure everybody's fed.
Yeah.
And then the question is, okay, why should we feed people? Well, I don't want to hear about someone who's lazy on a couch. And yeah, there's a system, and every now and then someone's going to milk the system.
Yeah.
That's not what you should predicate policy on, right? And so, let's take children for a second. Children show up in school, they're hungry. They're not going to learn. Right? So there's studies done when kids get breakfast in first period, not where they go to school early, breakfast in first period, math scores go up by 13%. Any teacher working today, if they had one little thing they could do and math scores go up by 13%, you better believe they'd do it.
They spend a lot of money on it.
They'd spend money on it. And we're talking
Unless
about,
it's food.
and some of the barriers to making this program happen, the custodial staff, because they say, well, it's messier.
Yep.
I mean, it just gets crazy. But and it's not like it's a big meal. It's an apple, maybe a cheese stick, some cracker, something like that. But it's just something sustenance. And then the school lunch program needs to be more robust. Quite frankly, I think the school lunch program needs to be free for everybody. This 3-tier system that we're working on now, where you got to pay into it, and then your money runs out, and the kid gets the lunch taken away from them. This is crazy. And this is the stuff my mother, when she ran a school lunch program, would never, ever let a kid walk away without getting fed.
Yeah.
She just said she'd look the other way and do what she had to do. But no, we could do better. Listen, I think also, let's get back to this kid who's not learning now. They're never going to live up to their full potential. And I believe that we need everyone in this country living up to their full potential if we want to compete in this global economy. You can't leave people behind, and so let's get to them early, so they can be nourished, they can learn, and then they contribute, and we can change society. But we have to do better. We have to put our priorities, in a different place.
Restaurants are always struggling, especially I hear in the New York area here, where you've been so successful with finding entry-level labor. We now have a few million people who've walked into the country. It seems to me that while we're dispersing them around the country, they're not allowed to work.
Yeah.
Something's wrong here.
Yeah, we need immigration policy, and I got to say on this one, as much as I'd love to point fingers only at the conservative side of the aisle, there's something that I think Democrats can do that can actually break the logjam. Is the reason why we've almost had immigration policy get through Congress a couple times. It always falls short. Part of the reason is, and I know people are going to, Democrats are going to be really pissed off at what I'm about to say. And probably a lot of immigration advocates are going to be pissed off at what I have to say right now. But we're not creating immigration policy because there's this idea that if you give someone citizenship, an immigrant citizenship, they're going to vote Democrat. That's why Republicans don't want to do it. And yet, as a Democrat, if you say, listen, these immigrants that are coming in here, if they're seeking asylum and there's a 3-year period before they get a hearing, they should be able to work. Well, every time you talk about immigration policy, it's always a pathway to citizenship.
Yep.
Let's drop that for now. Let's get people working.
Yep.
Right? And
because if they're working, they can buy food for their family. Then they don't have time to be in trouble.
and they're paying taxes.
Yes, thank you.
And they're paying taxes. Right now, people who are here illegally, they're working, they're getting a paycheck, and they are paying taxes because most people don't pay under the table.
Yep.
And they are paying, plus wherever they buy, they're paying sales tax and stuff like that. So they're paying taxes. And they're paying into Social Security, and they'll never see a dime of that. Right?
And we need it because we're upside down population.
And we need it, right. And so let's figure out a policy where people can work. They can come in the country if they have jobs. They can freely go back home so they can see their family, and they don't have to sneak back in. They don't have to pay a coyote to get them back in. They can just come back in because they're working.
Or
they
be
have
used
a job.
as a mule.
Right, or be used as a mule. It's like, it's just crazy what we're doing right now. And there's plenty of jobs.
Are you prepared to announce your candidacy for the presidency right now?
Yeah, on Twitter.
You don't mind waiting 25 minutes, do you?
No, not at all. I kicked around the idea of running for Congress at one point, and I used to spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
I co-founded this organization called Food Policy Action,
Yeah.
and we created a scorecard, and we graded Congress on how they voted on food issues. And that brought me to Capitol Hill at least once a month, and I would lobby for hungry people and things like that. And I kicked it around. My wife said, absolutely not. She wants no part of it.
She's very sensible.
Yeah, she is very sensible. And then it would drive me crazy. I need to get things done. If I had to go someplace where I couldn't get things done, I would go nuts.
Speaking of getting things done, here we are about to go into the summertime. I know you like to garden.
I do.
And do any of the things from your garden, when we get to August and everything is popping at the same time, peppers and tomatoes and cucumbers, any of that make it into any of your restaurants?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It does. I have it's a pretty good sized garden. It's probably about the size of this room here.
That's a lot of man hours.
I have 20 or so raised beds.
Yep.
Most of them are like 5 by 7. And I grow a variety of things. But yeah, when
and it
things
has to be fenced because if you're on the North Shore of Long Island, there's a few deer around.
I don't have them. So I have a fence, but it's a split rail fence
Yeah.
around it. And I had this idea where if there became a problem, I could just put up, extend the
Chicken
fence
wire,
and then put wire around it. For some reason, and the reason I didn't put fencing up is I've never seen deer on my property.
Wow.
I'm in Mattatuck.
Yeah.
There's deer everywhere out there.
And they sure are.
For some reason, and my understanding, and this is, I don't know if it's true or not, that deer, through generations, they have paths that they follow.
Yep.
All right. So my property was once, it's not anymore, once 100 acres. And I have the barn and the old farmhouse. The farmhouse was built in 1850. And I
remember when they built it. I was a young boy at the time.
And I'm pretty sure that some farmer just blew the hell out of any deer that came on this property. So they stay away.
It's in the DNA.
It's in their DNA. Yeah, they don't come near me. Lately, though, I've had wild turkeys that started eating all my blackberries.
Wild turkeys, we're in the East End too, on the South Fork, but up until 5 or 6 years ago, I never saw a turkey out there. I was out last weekend checking on the house. Turkeys all over the place.
Yeah, now we're seeing more foxes too.
Wildlife is back.
Yeah. So I don't have deer for some crazy reason. I get rabbits every now and then, and eat strawberries, but I also have a dog, and so the dog's chasing stuff away.
Yep.
I'm writing a memour right now.
Oh, yeah.
And what's interesting is that during the pandemic, I was doing a lot of these Zoom cooking classes, and it was 20 minutes of cooking and 40 minutes of me, jabbering on, and I kept running through a couple different themes, and one was fishing. One was gardening. And my grandfather taught me both. Now, my grandfather on my mother's side of the family
couldn't stay awake driving the Electra 225.
Couldn't do that, yeah. But there were all these things that I ended up doing that I loved doing. Fishing too, fishing, gardening, cooking. He also liked to cook too. I remember, I could smell it now. And whenever I go fishing, I wake up in the morning or the night before and I fry peppers and onions and make a frittata. Because that's what my grandfather, the smell of peppers and onions to me, that's fishing, waking up, that and coffee.
I have a similar memory with my grandfather. Yeah. We'd go out to Captree.
Oh, sure.
To the boat basin there and go together. And one of my favorite things today is a bacon and egg sandwich on an English muffin, which we would make and wrap up and then eat on the boat.
Yeah.
It's funny how we go back to 6 and 7 and 8 years old.
Right, and I kept going through these themes and I realized the importance. I didn't when in my 20s and 30s and 40s, I didn't think much of it. My grandfather was so important to my life. Yeah. And it just came out of these talks that I was having. But anyway, so.
And now you have your own tomato sauce.
My grandfather used to garden in 5-gallon buckets because we didn't have property. Yeah. So he built this trellis and he had 5-gallon buckets, and that's where he put his peppers and tomatoes and some cucumbers and a couple other things. And I started gardening.
Where did you get the homemade wine from then?
My Uncle Felice used to make homemade wine.
Gallon bottles?
We didn't drink. Also, it was kind of like this reddish brown, cloudy stuff, and
sat out on the balcony.
Somewhere in the basement at all times. Yeah, I think they made it in the bathtub. I have no idea. But gardening, there's just something about it.
Hands in the dirt.
Hands in the dirt, and it just makes me feel better. So if I have 2 hours in the morning, if I get up at 6 o'clock, get a cup of coffee, I get out to the garden, and I have nowhere to go. I'm not rushed. 2 hours, I could take my time. Mm-hmm. That's all it takes. Every day, 2 hours, and I'm good to go. And there's something about starting the day like that that just...
Physical and mental therapy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We got a pizza oven out at the beach house a couple of years ago. And we have a big herb garden right below our outdoor barbecue area. And nothing better than being out there with the grandkids, because now they're in the kitchen too. You're making pizza, they're decorating, and it gets competitive right away. Whose did you like better, Papa?
Yeah, my 14-year-old and soon to be 14 and 12-year-old, they really don't care about food at all.
No?
They don't care to cook at all. The 14-year-old, he eats. Little guy doesn't eat food. Doesn't care.
Somehow he's making it through, though.
Doesn't care about food. Somehow, I don't know how he stays alive, but somehow he's managing.
What's next? What do you got on your project list?
Well, we're hopefully going to sell some tomato sauce with you. I have.
Do you think there'll be more in a food line like that?
We're working on expanding it. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's not a business I know, and it wasn't a business I was looking to get into. And someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's this sauce."
Hey, these Rayo guys made a few bucks on their sauce business.
They certainly did. They certainly did. And I think ours is better. But they called me up.
Are we going to have a sauce off?
We can anytime. So this guy called me up. He said, we have the sauce. We want you to take a look at it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So they sent it to me. And it was out in Long Island. And it was around the 4th of July. My family was over. Mm-hmm. And there was like 6 jars of the sauce sitting on the table. And
Now, these are tough critics, the family.
Well, my brother was like, "What is this?" I was like, "I don't know. Some guy sent it to me. I don't know. It's Jersey tomato sauce." And Jersey tomatoes are Jersey. You know, if you know anything about Jersey, we love our tomatoes, and we have a special tomato that we grow. And
It is the Garden State.
yeah, it is the Garden State. And so he said, "Pop it open." And I was like, "This is really good." And so I tasted it. I was like, "Oh, yeah." So I called the guy back. We made a few tweaks to the recipe, and I said, "Yeah, fine. I'll work on this project with you." And then we expanded that, where we have these simmering sauces. There's 6 different sauces, different regions of Italy, so they're different ingredients. And you know, the whole idea that you can make something now with these sauces. It's not just to pour over, you know, pasta. So if you want to do like a seafood stew, you can take one of them. There's one with fennel and saffron.
I mean,
you can use that.
I think just using your sauce as a topping on fish
That's fine.
has
Yeah.
been really good.
Or you cook. So you sear this fish on one side, and
Yeah.
then you put it in the tomato and let it simmer. And that's it. And
Yeah.
we already did the work for you. And it's really delicious. There's no preservatives. It's all natural, and it's really fantastic. And it wasn't a business I was thinking of getting into, but now I'm really excited about it. But it's also a business I know nothing about, and it's a very different business. And you know, again, it's food, but it's not not a restaurant. And
How you doing in Vegas?
great.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, one of our restaurants we're closing because it was the MGM sold to the Hard Rock, and the
Yes.
Hard Rock's going to go in a different direction.
Yep.
But Craft Steak's busy.
Good.
We're having a great year. We're back to 2019 numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're back full here at Kraft.
Oh, we're doing really well here. Yeah.
Pre-COVID levels?
Yeah, just about there.
That's
yeah.
great.
A small batch is just turned the corner recently, and it's doing really well.
I just love it. I love the concept there. It's the casualness of it.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about Smile Farms, and there's the things we're doing there. There's some selfish motivations there too, and some selfish good things that have come out of that. Selfish in the sense that it's really good for the culture at 1-800-Flowers. We have all these young people who work for us, who volunteer their time, spend their energies at Smile Farms, volunteer for every event we do. So that's great for our culture.
Yeah.
And then the second piece of that is pretty good for the family too. You mentioned I have a 14-year-old granddaughter, my oldest of 7 grandkids, but to see her want to take a day off from school to volunteer her time at Smile Farms and to go back and do a report on it in school. So it's really good for the family too, because nieces and nephews, everybody knows they have a job.
Right.
And so there's other, but finally, I get to know you. I knew you before, but get to work with you and get to really know you. You're a pretty special guy, Tom.
Well,
and
thanks.
so
No,
Smile Farms has been very, very good to me.
No, we again love it, and also you make it so easy for us to do.
Yeah.
And you know, I was, you know, when we started working with Smile Farms, I wasn't that involved. I knew it was happening. I was like, yeah, fine, makes sense. And it wasn't until the one day I think you invited me to come to the fundraiser.
That's right.
And I you know, drove out and saw what you
Out
did.
in Manaville, yeah.
Yeah, and saw what you did and saw the people there, and it was like, okay, this all makes sense. And you know, I knew you through your commercials.
Yeah.
And you know, growing up, you know, it was that you know 1-800-Flowers commercial, so that's how I knew you. So it's just been a real pleasure to get to know you and
Tom,
you know,
you're a good guy.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, pal.
Yeah, thanks.